Introduce the keynote speaker, Professor Lewis T. Wells, the Herbert F. Johnson Professor of International Emeritus Herbert F. Johnson Professor of International Management of Harvard Business School. He will be providing a keynote address to this panel. Mr. Franz Obenhaus, he is the former managing director of Knowles, Philips Electronics in China. He has spent his lifespan, 35 years, in setting up factories, manufacturing facilities across the world. Mr. Philip Buckram, the editorial director, EMEA of The Economist Corporate Network, part of the Economist Intelligence Unit. Ms. Anne McCall, the CEO of Scottish Development International, one of the leading investment agencies in the world and in Europe. Ms. Dr. Enrika Bokniarz, she is the president of the Polish Confederation Davidian in Poland, the confederation of large companies and multinational enterprises, or Chamber of Commerce in Poland. She's also the president for the region for Boeing Enterprises. Last but not least, Ms. Zara Mafiri, she is the Director General of Morocco Export, based in Casablanca, Morocco. I would like to give the floor to the keynote speaker, Professor Lewis T. Wells.
One warning, especially for the interpreters, when an academic is assigned a 15-minute talk and is accustomed to a 55-minute class, the usual response is to talk 3 times as fast. That's tough on interpreters. I'm actually not speaking here as an academic. I do teach at Harvard Business School. I did teach at Harvard Business School to managers or would-be managers about operating in emerging markets. But at the same time, since 1967, I've worked with governments of frontier, the term didn't exist at the time, frontier markets and emerging markets, on their foreign investment policies, on negotiations with foreign investors, and on renegotiations of contracts with foreign investors, including a few nationalizations. And I wanted to spend my 15 minutes on some lessons that I think come out of that experience advising countries during this period. By the way, during that period, a few of the frontier countries became emerging markets. Some didn't. Some remained frontier countries in today's terminology. I wanted to do 3 things. I want to talk about 2 changes that I've seen in the past 15 years. They needn't be the most important, but I think there are striking changes that I've seen as an advisor. Then I want to talk about 2 predictions of what the changes would be that I would talk about 10 or 15 years from now. In other words, what's coming in the way of changes. And then 2 areas of continuity. I've seen no change over the past however many years since 1967 when I started to work. So if I use up my 15 minutes for the first, I'll just name the rest. First, what are the 2 changes, what are 2 important changes that I've seen in the past 15 years? One is the increasing importance to managers, to investors, of local communities where they operate in emerging markets and frontier markets. 15 years ago, investors could largely ignore local communities. Yes, they were retained sometimes, but they weren't significant in management problems. Their influence on foreign investors has increased, I think, for a number of reasons. First, decentralization has proceeded in emerging markets. Secondly, increase in democratization of democracy. And freer media has enabled local communities to become more informed about what's happening and increase their demands for side NGOs in the local communities has meant that they see rights that they haven't really expressed in the past. I think the NGOs, and I should confess my wife works for one, the NGOs don't have the solution with their prior free and informed consent. In fact, there really are often conflicts of interest between the national interest with foreign investors, for example, in mining, and the interest of the local community. And one sees now new approaches to trying to smooth the relations with local communities that didn't exist in the past, especially abandoning the rich country approach that is paying for the displaced farmer and move toward creating livelihoods for the displaced community. The second area where I've seen change in the last 15 years is in the increasing importance of international arbitration. The instruments for arbitration are old, but they were rarely used until the 1990s. The increased use, I think, came out of the financial crises in Southeast Asia and in Argentina, and the increase in raw material prices, where countries decided that they should have a larger percentage of the rents from the increased raw material prices and sought to renegotiate agreements. And through those, the examples were set for other firms to go to arbitration. The international system of arbitration has not been satisfactory in my view for companies, for investors, or for host countries. Investors face what's really a nuclear option. If you go to arbitration, you almost certainly ruin your relationship with the host country. Secondly, it's a very slow process. I'm involved in an arbitration right now of a dispute that occurred from events in 2007. This is 7 years later. The first arbitration hearing in this case took place 5 years ago. There's still no resolution. So that's a very slow process. And it's very expensive. In one of the cases in which I was involved, the company legal fees were $24 million. The country's legal fees were $16 million. So it is expensive. So it's slow, expensive, and destroys relationships.
Thank you.
On the country side, countries believe that the system constrains their ability to regulate investment in ways that they think they're entitled to regulate investment. Countries see themselves as generating disputes by accident, where a decentralized unit of government does something without realizing the impact under a bilateral investment treaty. And the central government is called to arbitration because of what a state or province did. Thirdly, countries believe that the system is biased against them. Whether it is biased or not biased against them, the belief that it's biased is enough to reduce trust in the system. The result is a great deal of pressure to reform the system that was hardly used 15 years ago. What are the future, if I were giving this talk 10 years from now, if I could still stand here 10 years from now, what do I think that I would be talking about as changes? First, the impact of the dramatic increase in information available to governments when they negotiate with foreign investors. This is just beginning to have an impact. Governments now have access to the internet. They know much more about what kinds of terms companies have entered other countries with, something they have not recently known. the asymmetry in information is just beginning to decline. And I think we'll see much more of that. There are a number of efforts, some of which you may know about, to provide assistance to especially the frontier countries in their negotiations with foreign investors. And as those efforts to provide assistance begin to materialize, one of the results will be more information available to the countries. The second impact of more information to governments, I believe, is there'll be more emphasis on choosing the right company. Now governments discuss the right industry or the right nationality, but they don't discuss often the right company. And as they learn more about the behavior of companies, individual investors in other countries, I think this will become more and more influential in the negotiations. For example, the companies that rush to arbitration when there's a dispute, I think will be increasingly unpopular. Those who negotiate settlements, I think, will begin to get preferences. The second area where I think that I would be talking about 10 years from now is the actions of emerging markets and frontier markets with respect to tax avoidance. What one sees at the moment is increased discussion and tension over taxes on capital gains. This is especially important in mining, where many contracts are negotiated by small firms which do not plan actually to mine, but negotiate a deal and go out and sell it. And it's become a politically sensitive issue in the countries that are affected because they see a gain that in the sale that is not subject to their tax. Now, whether it should be or shouldn't be, it's a big political issue. And I think there'll be more attention paid to this. The second tax area that I think one will, in emerging markets, see attention to is debt from affiliates. I've seen projects where the project is financed 90% by debt and 10% by equity, which creates large deductions for income tax purposes for interest, where the debt is held by the parent. It's affiliate debt. The parent itself may have a debt equity ratio of debt, 1 unit of debt for 3 units of equity. And something seems inappropriate to the emerging market government tax authorities or to the same in frontier countries. I think what we'll see with this is an attempt to do apportionment, that is to allocate this kind of expense across the units of the multinational enterprise, so that if you have 10% of the capital of the multinational enterprise, you allow deductions only for 10% of the interest payments of the entire multinational enterprise. It's a step toward what many people are calling for, and that's a multilateral agreement that will apportion income across the board among countries, like happens with many states in the U.S. I think we're a long ways, and will be 10 years from now, a long ways from a multilateral agreement on this. I think what we'll see is step-by-step countries acting on their own on particular elements of tax policy. Finally, what are the two elements that I see continuing over the 40 years that I've been doing this? One is a reliance on the part of frontier markets, especially, on incentives to attract investment rather than reform of the investment climate, with the belief that tax incentives can offset a bad investment climate. And I think it's just as ineffective today as it was 40 years ago. It's much easier to create incentives because it takes only an active legislature. It's much more difficult to reform the bureaucracy, build infrastructure, and so on. That creates an attractive investment climate. The second continuing element is the agreements that are negotiated for 25 to 30 years don't last 25 to 30 years. In infrastructure, we now know that a larger percentage of the renegotiations of infrastructure agreements are initiated by the company rather than by the government. The publicity goes to the renegotiations initiated by government. I think circumstances change such that this will continue to happen, that both parties will at some point before the 25 to 30 years want to renegotiate the investment. I think this will occur with or without assistance